I introduce to you Jason Hunter.
Thank you, Sharon. It's great to be back here. I always like to make the joke that I'm infamous around Riverside as being the first classified civil servant fired there in probably the history of the city. I basically walked in one day and said, we don't really have a reason, just get the hell out. So, and I always tell people, I'm not that smart, MIT, but I don't tell people it's the Michigan Institute of Trucking. Anyway, so how many of you folks have heard about Measure Z? How many people know what Measure Z was? It was the sales tax that was passed at the end of 2016. You know, it was an additional 1% on top of the existing sales tax that was there. Okay, it was passed. It raises about $50 million in revenue for the city. How many folks here have heard about the city manager's new contract? How many people have heard about that? Right? Where he's going to be making close to $500,000 this year. And so you read a little bit about that. How many people have heard about our mayor vetoing that contract? Okay, this is great. And did you hear as well that he actually filed his lawsuit on Friday? That's the latest and greatest. Now, how many people have heard this? How many people have heard about the budget cuts that are coming to the city of Riverside very shortly? Okay, a little bit less. They're talking about 4.5% this year, 4.5% the next year, and after that, I think the world actually implodes. Okay, because that's how badly the numbers look for year 3, about 2020 or so. Okay, so this is a pretty well-informed crowd. I mean, this is great. Let me tell you, they're all interconnected. They're all interconnected, and we're going to kind of go through with you here today kind of how all these things have played out and have kind of reached this very critical juncture where they're all interconnected to each other, and try to give you, as you're weaving between these stories independently, maybe start to realize how they're all connected and how they all come together. So let's start from the beginning, right? So let's look at Measure Z. Measure Z, does anybody remember what it was passed for? Like, what was the title of Measure Z?
I don't know the title, what it was called. Public safety, fire trucks, police.
Yeah, vital services and public safety. Remember that?
Yeah.
Does anybody remember the first 2 things they appropriated money for at Measure Z?
Retirement?
A new library and pension obligation bonds from folks who retired many, many years ago. Now, does that sound to you like public safety and vital services? But it did give you an idea of Measure Z was passed as a general tax. It wasn't a special tax. It didn't mean they had to dedicate that money to any specific service, right? As soon as you guys passed that, you know, and I was on the no on Measure Z. I wasn't on the committee, but I was out there doing what I could to inform people about what was going on. And there were many people in this room who actively participated on the committee and did things. We were trying to tell the public, listen, they're going to spend this on whatever they want to, okay? There's no requirements for them to spend that money on vital services and public safety, okay? So, you know, that passed. They told us at the time it would raise about $50 million. I think it's actually doing a little bit better than that. Now, how many people heard about this? This is one of these really great unkept secrets, or kept secrets, I should say, that needs to be unkept in the city of Riverside. How many people have ever heard of the partnership compensation model? Probably just a couple in the room. Okay, just a couple, probably the insiders. The partnership compensation model. Now, let me tell you what the partnership compensation model was. Not many people knew about this. It basically tied all of our city employees' salaries, every single person that works for the city, for the most part, outside of maybe the city manager, but the rest of the executives are all tied to it, to the passage of new taxes. Their salaries, their raises are tied to passing new taxes. So what do you think you've got in store for you coming up from here on out in the city of Riverside, now that the salaries of your employees are tied to new revenue sources? Well, let me guess. Has anybody heard about the RPU rate increase?
Well, yeah.
Well, did folks know that 20% of what you pay in your utility bills is actually a tax? How many people knew that? Okay. Part of that tax is on your bill. It's called the utility users tax. It's about 6.5%. And that goes into a bucket which is thrown into the partnership compensation model. I was kind of joking, I'm like, I don't know what partnership means to you, but I don't feel like there's much of a partnership going on here. I feel like they're just taking money out of my pocket. I don't know exactly what I'm getting back because I'm looking at 4.5% budget cuts, right? So everybody was in on this partnership compensation model, and what it did was it maxed out the raises for all of our public employees. I don't know if there's 1,600 public employees, somewhere around that number. Don't quote me on that. Where on top of their average, what we call merit raises for doing a good job, they're about 5% raises. Every employee in the city is going to get an additional 4 to 6% raise for the next 2 years, about more or less. So we're talking about pretty substantial raises going on. Meanwhile, our revenues in this town are about flat as far as any other sources of revenue. It's really the only new income coming in is that sales tax. And this was designed in a way so that all of our employees could actually max out 2 years in a row by how the revenue came in from Measure Z. So we're talking about these nice 10% raises across the board. And what has that led to? That's led to our 4.5% budget cuts. Because what they did, let me tell you how they designed the Measure Z money. They more or less kind of put it in a lockbox that the Budget Engagement Commission kind of looks after. Has anybody heard of the Budget Engagement Commission? Yes. Okay, it's this group of about maybe around 20 citizens appointed by the city council and by the mayor who looks after and makes recommendations. This was recently created. It was created actually with the passage of Measure Z or shortly thereafterwards. And they look at the budget, they look at the Measure Z funds, they're trying to give their best advice to the city council as to how this money should be spent, okay? So what happened was, you're giving out these 10% raises. City revenues are only going up, maybe a couple percent. The new sales tax money is more or less lockbox, it can't be touched. So what ends up happening? We have budget cuts, right? 80% of the general fund expenditures are personnel costs. So it's just the math. It's math. So, of course, I would question, how do you cut services for residents and give out double-digit raises at the same time? It just doesn't seem like good policy to me, okay? And the other thing driving the budget cuts are, maybe you've heard of this, I don't know, it's been kind of a secret out there. In the paper, maybe you've seen it, it's called pension liabilities, CalPERS. Has anybody heard of that? And getting hands on CalPERS, okay? Yeah. The City of Riverside owes $600 million more than it has to our employees in the form of unfunded pension liabilities. And what that means to, so that's a really amorphous number. What does that mean? It means in about 6 years' time, in order to start paying some of that off, the city's got to come up with about $60 million of new money, okay, in order to fund these pension benefits for the employees, right? So, geez, I think $60 million in about 5-6 years. I think, well, geez, that'd be about what Measure Z is in about 5-6 years. What a coincidence. Because if you remember when they passed Measure Z, they were talking about, we have like a $10 million budget deficit. But then they went out and got a $50 million tax. I never really quite understood that. Why did you need $50 million if you only have a $10 million budget deficit? I'll let you extrapolate from what I just told you. Okay, so, now let's get to the general manager's contract, or the city manager's contract. Well, all the employees are getting 10% raises, right? Our city attorney in the last 2 years, I think he got like a 15% raise. Our city clerk in the last 2.5 years got a 30% raise, okay? So I'm thinking the city manager said, well, geez, hey, what's in it for me? I'm the one who organized Measure Z. What do I get out of this, right? So maybe you read about it in the paper. I'll go over just briefly some of the details of it. But it was a $323,000 salary contract. It was opened up 2.5 years early. So we had a 5-year contract when he started here. They renegotiated it 2.5 years early. And under the premise of, well, if I don't get an extension, a 7-year extension, everyone else on my team's gonna quit. You won't have any city employees left because they're obviously only here because of my ability, right? That was the story anyway. And it has all sorts of new terms in it, like he gets a bonus 7 weeks of vacation that he gets to more or less cash out, worth about $50,000. He gets his state bar dues paid for. He gets, this is the great one, this is the one I think most people like kind of look at and their eyes kind of bug out. He gets a $675,000 mortgage for his house at, from what I can estimate, less than 1% interest paid for by the city. Now, they're not making his mortgage payments. They're just subsidizing his interest rate, right? If you went out in the private market, you're probably paying 4, 5, 6%, right? He's going to get that off of taxpayer funds at probably less than 1%, I'm figuring, right? And so, the first thing I said was, you know, before I even looked at the contract terms, of course, was, well, why the hell are we giving out a 7-year contract? Right? The city council's only there for 4 years, right? Why would you do a 7-year? It's a facade. The 7-year contract it's totally front-loaded. So the most money in the contract comes in year one, where I would estimate the guy's going to make close to $500,000 because he's going to be able to cash out all of his vacation and administrative leave, and he's going to save the most on his mortgage in those first couple of years on the interest payments, right? So I'm guessing, now I'm pretty good at guessing. I do know a thing or two about numbers. That his year-on-year raise for this year, for 1 year, is coming in somewhere around 25%. Okay. Once again, we are looking at 4.5% budget cuts for services for you. Okay? So what happened? So he went to go get the contract passed, maybe about a month ago, right? It was in the paper. And he, you know, it was this big, I call it this dog and pony show. They all fretted, oh, it's a lot of money, but this guy's the best, and, you know, and all that stuff. It's most of it's for show. And so, you know, it passed 5-2. It looked like it wasn't going to pass, and a couple of people on the council kind of flipped at the last second. And so, your representatives are Perry and Adams. Perry voted against it. Adams voted in favor of it. Okay?
And mine is, because I'm 5, I'm on the other
Chris
side.
MacArthur voted in favor of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So we thought, well, this is it. This is the end. Well, whatever, he's going to get it, and so on and so forth. And that's the end of the drama, right? Well, little did we know. I left. They did this in an afternoon session.
I was there too.
I was there. I was like, raising my angry fist, and whatever that's going to do. And little did we know, in the evening session, they were going to come back, and at the very end of the meeting, our mayor tried to veto the contract. At which point in time, all hell broke loose. Anybody's seen this in the videos? It's great theater, right? So, he was basically told by the city attorney, you don't have the right, sir, to veto this contract because the city manager serves at the pleasure of the city council, and that is it. Of course, I was thinking to myself, well, that's kind of biased because you're in the same position, Mr. City Attorney. You serve at the pleasure of the city council, so that's kind of a little bit of a biased opinion because if Rusty, our mayor, couldn't vote, I call him Rusty. I know him pretty well. I've launched 2 ethics complaints against him, so I know him pretty well. So I thought to myself, well, geez, if you can't veto the city manager's contract, well, then by natural logic, he wouldn't be able to veto your contract either, would he? So it's a little bit of a conflict, I thought at the time. Anyway, he said, well, I went and I got outside counsel, and that person agrees with me, and I thought, well, who picked that outside counsel? Well, you did. You can shop that around. I mean, I know this much. You can pay for whatever legal opinion you want. You give somebody enough money, you'll get it. That's my experience with the law. So anyway, so that kind of has blown up, and they said, well, Mr. Mayor, you're going to have to go to court, right? If you want to get this, if you're going to have to go to court, you have this big legal fight, and so that's what the mayor did. He ended up going to court. He filed on Friday, and the reasoning comes down to this. So the mayor was like, well, you know, in our charter it says, he read the charter off, and he says, I have the right to veto any ordinance, any resolution, or any other action by the city council. And so, I looked at the public comments that came in during the meeting and after the meeting, and it seems to me about 95% of the public is on the side of the mayor. That's what it seems to be, right? Now that's the court of opinion. That's not the Riverside Superior Court, okay? Right. So let's just keep that in mind. So, I was researching something else in the city manager's office. I happened to stumble across something. I noticed, going back looking at the city manager's contract, and then looking at the city attorney's contract, that the package they put together when they approved the contract seemed to be missing some information. And this is really technical, so I don't want to dwell on this, okay? But it's this resolution that I went back 15 years and it looked like every other executive contract contained this resolution, along with the contract itself. And I noticed, why is that missing? And I started opening up the resolution. The resolution says, well, this provides the spending authority for which anything out of the existing resolution, if you add on to it via contract, let's say you have somebody who's making $100,000 and you want to pay him $120,000. You have to create a spending authority first by resolution before you can pass the contract. That's the way it works in the government. You got to appropriate the money first before you can spend it. Okay? Two different processes, a little bit of government ease finance there. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. But I noticed, well, why would this be missing? Because we're giving out all these precedent-setting benefits and salaries we haven't seen in Riverside ever, if not a long time. And then I realized, well, wait a second. When the city attorney got up and said our mayor couldn't veto an employment contract, he didn't say he couldn't veto a resolution or an ordinance. And this was a resolution creating the spending authority. Okay. And so I took that to the city council and I said, this was last Tuesday, I don't know if you guys follow 30 Miles of Corruption, but my speech is up there, is that, in my opinion, this is very shady dealing, because this was a way to thwart the mayor who they suspected might veto this contract from exercising his veto, which is protected by our city charter. That's our city constitution, right? So we have to protect that in this city. That protects us, the people, from our government, okay? And so I said, well, without the spending authority, guys, you can't pay out these additional terms. The city manager can work under his old contract if he wants to continue working here, but he needs to give the money back from the new contract. And what I didn't know at the time, but I know now, is within 2 days after getting his new contract, our city manager had cashed out $50,000 worth of vacation time. And his existing mortgage was, they said they gave him a $675,000 mortgage, right? His mortgage was actually only $625,000. He cashed $50,000 in equity out of his house on our dime at a subsidized interest rate. Okay, so he put $100,000 into his wallet, very soon after this contract was passed. I don't know about you, but that seems a little bit suspicious, a little bit shady.
Very suspicious.
So, where do we go from here? As I said, so I went back and I started looking at old contracts, and I noticed every one of them had the spending authority in there. In fact, when I opened up these resolutions, this is what the resolution said. The resolution said, this resolution amending this, it's pretty technical, this master salary and fringe benefit plan must be passed in order to enact the provisions of the contract that are outside of the existing scope of this resolution. Right? Must be passed. So, so who would have done something like that? Who would have put that package together? And of course, I'm certain now, and I've already started beginning to see it, there's going to be an excuse coming out fairly soon from the city attorney and the city manager's office telling me somehow that this resolution didn't have to be included somehow, right? I'm expecting that I'll be getting that. And I'll be addressing that tomorrow at 2 p.m. if anybody wants to come down. And I can assure you, they are wrong, okay? And so I kind of leave it like this before I open up to questions. And I'm sure I've missed some things, and I kind of loosely put this together. And a lot of this information is kind of breaking as we speak, right? So I leave you with this, is that here are my thoughts on it. And I've told several council members, and I put it in various social media platforms, is I've seen a lot of chicanery, a lot of skullduggery, a lot of, you name it, go on in this city. But I think there has to be a line drawn when we have executives circumventing and deviating from existing accepted processes that have gone on here for a long time. And in my opinion, violating our municipal code in the process in order to thwart our duly elected mayor from exercising his charter-protected veto in order to financially benefit themselves. I think that's a very bright, a very distinct line. And I think if there's anything worth fighting for, we as a community have to step forward and support our mayor on this and say this is it. Okay? Because at that juncture, you've got non-elected bureaucrats basically with their will at the public treasury. That's your money.